Welcome to Behind the Case podcast, a podcast that focuses on navigating the challenges our clients face with divorce and family law in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Behind the Case is brought to you by the Turner Monahan legal team. With over 70 years of collective experience in divorce and family law. Together, Tyler Monahan, Keaton Monahan, Tina Campbell, and the Turner Monahan team will discuss real-life cases, answer questions, and explore family law areas from divorce to child custody. Our goal is to clarify scenarios and demystify legal jargon, making the process less daunting and reminding you that you're not alone. So sit back and let's discuss what happens behind the case.
My name is McKenzie. I'm an attorney with Turner Monahan. I also have my undergraduate degree in women and gender studies.
Hi, I'm Tina Campbell. I'm one of the other family law attorneys here at Turner Monahan. I've been here for a few years and have been practicing family law for about 18 years.
When you think of LGBTQ plus divorces, are there any big pieces that come to mind?
So I specifically had a same-sex divorce case. This one was pretty complicated because it was two women and there was children born during the marriage. And the children that were born during the marriage were born of natural conception with a outside person, which became very complicated in the divorce. This was not a sperm donor situation. This was not done through any doctors, or there was no gestational agreements. So it became quite complicated. So yes, I have dealt with situations in same-sex marriage.
Do you receive a lot of inquiries about LGBTQ plus divorce matters?
I'm seeing more.
I'm seeing more, not necessarily at this law firm, but I am seeing more overall, I think, in the entire area. This is still Texas, so, it's different than places, like Los Angeles or New York. Yeah, there's more, I think, coming in.
Yeah, I would definitely say within the last 5 years, more so than before. I mean, even in the last 2 years, I've had 4 same-sex divorces, and I think I have 1 still pending. So it's more. It's still not a huge percentage of our caseload by any means, just because of the population, but it is more than it used to be.
Are there any nuances or specific laws in Dallas-Fort Worth, especially within the family code, that impact LGBTQ plus divorces differently?
There's no law specifically that is different to same-sex marriage. In fact, there's been case law that we are to read the code the exact same for same-sex marriages and for opposite-sex marriages. And that's post-Obergefell. So the code has not changed. There is not a specific section in which same-sex marriage falls under. It all falls under the same law.
You mentioned a case there. Could you explain a little bit about it and how it affects the law?
So Obergefell is a Supreme Court case. Basically, it requires the recognition of same-sex marriage across the United States of America. It requires all states to allow same-sex couples to get married or be treated the same under the laws.
Are there any legal terms that someone going into a same-sex divorce should be aware of?
I think specifically same-sex marriages tend to have a bigger emphasis on things like gestational agreements. That is something that a lot of same-sex marriages and honestly opposite-sex marriages are seeing now that there's a rise in IVF. So there are more gestational agreements in opposite-sex marriages, but oftentimes if there are children of a divorce in the same-sex marriage, there is often a gestational agreement. So it's really important for people to understand what that is and to have a copy of it. And don't rely on your doctor to keep that copy.
Most certainly. And also not to be offended when there's lots of questions about, how did the conception occur? Where did the conception occur? Who was involved in this conception? We have to ask sometimes some pretty invasive questions to get the details so that we know how best to move forward. Because that's the thing that is probably the biggest issue and the most different from same-sex couple divorces is when there's kiddos and how those kiddos came into this relationship and what's been done. If there was, an adoption done, if it was not, who's on the birth certificate, who's the biological parent, who's not. Those are really important factors that sometimes we don't have to address with quite the same level of detail in what would be considered a traditional marriage. So please don't be offended that we have to ask these questions because we have to get this information so that we can make the best determination as to how to make sure that your rights are protected on both sides in regards to these kiddos.
Yeah, and I had a case, the one that I was referencing earlier, where the child was conceived by traditional means, meaning a man and a woman conceived the child during the marriage of a same-sex couple. That it can be very complicated because there's different presumptions under the law when you're married that if a child is conceived during your marriage, it is presumed to be the child of the parties, which is how you want it because it cuts down a lot on administrative paperwork. But then when it's a same-sex couple, obviously that there has to be intervention there to create the conception. And so that is extremely important for us to know if we need to bring in a biological father or a sperm donor into the case, and if we need to terminate those rights so that later on down the road, it does not become a problem for either of the parents.
Because those rights would have to be terminated for the other parent to be able to adopt, to be able to have those same parental rights and the same rights as the other parent.
How is child custody and adoption issues handled in LGBTQ plus divorces? Let's take a quick pause here. If you or someone you know is navigating divorce or family law matters in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, reach out to Turner Monahan for a free legal consultation. Call us at 817-332-4477 or visit us at tumolaw.com. That's TUMOLAW.com for a free legal consultation. Now, let's get back to behind the case.
In a perfect world, we would say they're the same. They are under the law. They are required to be treated the same. Obviously, we understand that there are nuances to all of that, and they are supposed to be treated the same as opposite sex adoptions and custody agreements.
It could just get a little more complicated.
It can get more
because
complicated.
sometimes, like in your case, you have an extra party that's involved. In some of the cases I've had in the past where the child was conceived through traditional means, and there's now this man who contributed, but he's not involved as a father. He's not financially responsible for anything, but he still has rights to this child because he is the biological father. So we had to terminate that gentleman. So then the other mother could then adopt so that she could also be on the birth certificate and the whole thing. But because that other gentleman was not involved, didn't have anything to do with anything, it took us quite some time to find that individual and to explain to him, no, we're not trying to get you on the hook for anything. We're actually trying to get you out. Yeah, you can't ever be on the hook for anything. And sometimes there's just time, extra time involved to make those things happen. So I have found that in some of those cases, because of these extra complexities, that it takes a little longer. So patience is required.
Yeah, and I think don't be offended if that is your situation and we have to take that extra step because we are doing our due diligence for you. We want to make sure it's done correctly. It's not that we don't personally believe that you are the mother of this child or the father of this child. That is absolutely not the case. We want to make sure that you are covered in your legal paperwork A to Z, and we just want it done correctly. So it's not in any means a reflection of our view on you as a parent.
No, we want to make sure that you're absolutely protected in the future. Yes. And I strongly encourage, individuals when they're in this situation, go ahead and take all the steps, early on in your relationship, right after kiddo is born, so that you can make sure that each of you have the same legal rights and full legal rights to these kiddos and that kind of a thing. So that if, God forbid, down the road, something does go south and you have to move forward with a divorce or a separation, that component is already done.
Yeah. Or even a death. If you're not even getting divorced, if the parent who is the biological parent of the child dies, it could become a problem for you in the future too. So yes, definitely at the beginning, I recommend it either before the child is born, if possible, or immediately after. Do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and that way you won't have to do that later in a much different environment. Yes, when you're doing it early on and everybody can be cooperative and everybody's on board with getting those things taken care of, much easier, much cheaper,
yes,
much faster, so that it's just done, and then you never have to worry about if the what ifs later on, because it is heartbreaking to be able to explain to a mother who has been there since the day that child was born that because that child doesn't have any biological connection to them, that they're not really theirs in the eyes of the law. And so we had to do all these other things that's going to be very expensive and that's the other parent's not cooperating with right now. to make it so. So it's a hard conversation for attorneys to have from a mom perspective to a mom, very hard conversation. So those are extra steps that do need to be taken, preferably in the beginning. But if not, then we absolutely will move people through that so that we can make sure that they're protected so that they don't have to deal with it again in the future.
Is the division of asset different for same-sex couples?
No, and the only thing I can foresee being potentially different is the date of marriage, and this does happen in opposite couples every once in a while, not as often. But if you were together and committed to one another before Obergefell and before the state in which you live in recognized same-sex marriage, you might have a difference of opinion on when your date of marriage is, and that can affect what assets were acquired during the marriage, which then affects the asset division at the end. And so sometimes couples will have a commitment ceremony before they were legally allowed to get married, and then have an actual wedding after they were legally allowed to get married. Now, it's my understanding that Obergefell has said if you have had a previous commitment, not Obergefell specifically, but the case law following it, if you had had a commitment ceremony before Obergefell and now your state recognizes it, you can backdate your marriage. So that is a little bit of a nuance same-sex marriages may face.
It's a little bit of a gray area, and it is kind of case specific. It's factually based. It's, what can you show as proof of that commitment ceremony? But other than that, as far as the division of community assets, it's done exactly the same way as any traditional divorce.
What resources can LGBTQ plus divorcees seek for a fair trial in conservative states?
A lot of the same resources are important for anyone who's going through a divorce or separation, is making sure that you understand, the law, and that how property's divided, and that this is a community property state, and then it's a 50-50 community property state, and kind of the basics. And then, yes, I'm sure that there are some additional resources.
Yeah, there are all kinds of nonprofits in the area that specifically cater to LGBTQ plus community. They might be a good place to start. There are multiple attorneys that really focus in on this specific area of law, and they are good resources as well. I know that I've taken a few classes and CLEs on it, and there is a lot to learn on it. But I think the point of having a judge is that they are impartial. I would say I have not seen personally any specific discrimination in my cases by a judge just because the couple was a same-sex marriage.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. And I mean, the cases that I've had that are same sex have been all in Tarrant County and in multiple courts in Tarrant County. So not all in the same court. And I have never had any inclination that our judges were treating these particular clients any differently than I have seen them treat all the other hundreds of clients that I've brought before them in the past. I think there's not nearly the stigma that may have been in the past. I think it's just kind of par for the course now, and it's just part of our day to day. And our judges are very accepting and very accommodating. And I agree, I've not felt like there's been any issues.
Yeah, I think our judges in Tarrant County really primarily focus on the children.
Absolutely.
And that's to them, it doesn't matter if it's two moms or two dads, a mom and dad. Their concern is who is going to be best for these children. I would also recommend seeking out an attorney who has dealt with same-sex marriages. We have here at Turner Monahan. There are also other attorneys out there that specialize in it, but I would definitely recommend speaking to somebody who has dealt with this before.
How can they reach you and hire you as an attorney?
We have a website. It is tumulaw.com. You can also give us a call. It's 817-332-4477. Misty is our intake specialist, and she will talk to you, and you can tell her specifically if you want to hire one of us. She can hear your case and tell you which attorney she recommends. So those are the best ways to reach us.
We're pausing our deep dive into today's topic, but the discussion isn't over. Join us in the next part of this episode as we continue to unravel the complexities behind the case. If our conversation today sparked questions or you're seeking further insight, consider subscribing and sharing our podcast. If you are in the DFW area and facing a divorce or family law situation, contact our attorneys today at 817-332-4477 or online at tumolaw.com. That's TUMOLAW.com for a free legal consultation. Navigating legal challenges can be daunting, but with the right support, clarity is within reach. Stay tuned as we continue this conversation on the next episode. Please note that the information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as legal advice. Listening to this podcast or contacting our team does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. For advice on your specific situation, please consult with a licensed attorney in your area.